So that's the being alive. There are two different eligibility windows based on when you were born. So this is going to impact what amounts of compensation each of you are going to be entitled to. And I'll explain in just a minute why these exist, but I'll start by explaining the two windows. The first one is if you were born before November 20th of 1995. If you were born before November 20th of 1995, you'll be eligible for compensation for drinking water advisories that were in place after November 20th of 2013. So we had the dates up on the board earlier. There were two drinking water advisories that were in place before 2013, and there's one that's been in place since April of 2013. Everybody is going to be entitled to compensation for the drinking water advisory that's been in place since 2013. If you were born on or after November 20th, 1995, the law allows you to claim further back in time for things that happened to you. And that means they can go back all the way to 1995, they will be entitled to compensation for any drinking water advisory they experienced in 1995. And that would include the two previous ones. The reasons for this is what they're called limitation periods. This is written into the legal system. This is Canada's law. It basically means that if something happens to you, you have to sue somebody in a certain time. If you don't do it in time, you'll lose the right to sue. The law expects adults to do this. The law doesn't expect children to do this. So they don't have to sue until they're adults, and that's why they can go back all the way to minimum. So that's going to affect everybody here. But again, for the drinking water advisory that's currently in place, and then again in 2013, everybody here is eligible. The other thing is that you need to have lived under the drinking water advisory. I've got the term ordinarily resident up there. That's the term that we have in summer. What that basically means is that you needed to have spent during a year, now for a year, more time in the community than not in the community. Effectively 6 months plus 1 day. So in 2014, if you lived here from January until June, you're going to be eligible for that year. Even if you don't, you're eligible for that year. Because you lived here under the drinking water advisory. If you're younger than that, if you're 18 or younger, and you left, and you didn't spend the whole 6 months here, but you left because you needed to go to school, and that wasn't your choice, but if you were in school, you would be living in your community, that you were still eligible. We're not going to penalize people that needed to go away to school, but you still have to deal with all of the implications of the drinking water advisory in the community. That may lead you to the question, what happens if you leave that reserve? We're not a member of the Police Association of Regina, and you left in 2012, and you're older than 27 years old. What happens to you? Well, this is a question that we had to deal with pretty carefully when we were negotiating this, because we were trying to find the most fair way to distribute compensation. And so we took the lead of the communities that were affected, the representative plaintiffs. And what we heard from them was that they wanted to make sure that everybody in the community that actually experienced the drinking water advisory, lived under the drinking water advisory, compensated as much as possible for that experience. And what that means is that if you're not living under the drinking water advisory, you do not experience it, you're on reserve, there is no compensation. There is, however, the compensation was paid to the First Nation that was meant to address all of the harms the community experienced, and that can include people who were off reserve. If that's the way that the First Nation would like to spend money, they're entirely entitled to distribute it to whoever they want. You might be wondering how much. I'm sure you're wondering how much. What is this compensation about? Well, it's going to be a bit different for different communities based on how remote you are and what kind of advisory you have. So in this community, it's a boil water advisory, and ISC does not consider this to be a remote community. For that reason, it's going to be roughly $1,300 a year for non-remote distribution under the core water. For every year that you're eligible for compensation, you'll get $1,300. Then there's the addition, the specified entities. This can be a long way. Dementia use, neurological issues, respiratory issues, stomach issues, liver, kidney. Take a look. If any of those apply, I encourage you to fill it in. It just needs to have been caused by the water. Now, what does that mean, caused by the water? Like, how are you supposed to know if it was caused by the water? The reality is, you can't really know if it was caused by the water. So when we negotiated the settlement, we went to experts and we said, what can be caused by water? What kind of harms can be caused by water? And we got that whole list of harms, and that's in the settlement, the claim form you have. And so we know those can be caused by the water. If you have experienced any of those harms, and they could have been caused by the water, I encourage you to contribute to those harms. But you do need to have used the water consistent with drinking water. So you need to have managed to boil the water. If you weren't boiling the water, that is important. This also doesn't cover water that wasn't treated. So if you think you might have gotten sick from the water that you collected from the river, that's not what this settlement is about. That might be covered by something else, different claims, specifically about the water from the water system. So and if you're eligible for the base amount of compensation, you can be eligible for the health insurance. If you're not going to be eligible for the base amount of compensation, you won't be eligible for the health insurance. I mentioned earlier that you can claim for people that passed away since 2017, and you can also claim for minors. There's a separate process for that, but there's a separate claim form for that. They're called representative claim forms. So if you're claiming for someone who passed away, it's a state claim, you can use the representative claim form. And you need different things for that. So you'll need to prove, you need just a document to show proof of death. Death certificate for somebody who's passed away. And there's a different process if they passed away with a will and without a will. So if there is no will, that's fine. You can still get the compensation. I'm going to do different things. If that is the situation that you're in, please flag me down. But there is a part in here, I believe it's in Francis Part that specifies how to do it. And the same thing goes for personal representatives of minors and people that are under disability, so people that are legally not capable of filling out the form for themselves. If courts have said somebody should be doing that for them, you can use the representative claim form for them. Those payments are going to come out subject to the provincial laws. So we're still working out exactly how much is going to be able to be paid to the representative for each of those situations. But the important thing is that they're eligible. You submit the claim, they will get the compensation. First Nations, what makes a First Nation eligible? Well, first of all, you need to have First Nations lands, so that's a reserve. We've got a check mark for that for businesses. And they need to be subject to a drinking water advisory, and that is an advisory that was issued by the public body that was responsible for the water. So that could be the First Nation, that could be Canada. Whoever was responsible for the water, if they put out a public advisory to say, don't drink the water, boil the water before you use it, or don't use it at all, that qualifies as an advisory. And if that advisory lasts for a full year, 365 days straight, then that is an eligible drinking water advisory for this settlement. That's why each of the periods was longer than a year. They have to be longer than a year in order to be qualified. If you have a drinking water advisory that was less than a year, that's not getting compensated.
I've spoken about this a little bit already, but there is compensation to the community. It's $500,000 first. 50 cents for every dollar that's paid to you also goes to the community. So as an example, if after all of you have filled out your forms, we tally it all up and Canada spends about $5 million in paying compensation to you, they'll then write a check for $2.5 million and they'll send that to your name. And again, that can be used for anything. Reinforcing the deadline, March 7th. It's coming up. It's only about 2 months away. It's less than 2 months away. So I encourage you all to get your claim forms in. Once the claim form is in and the period is passed, the claim administrator is going to decide whether to settle. That's not us, as lawyers, it's not Canada, it's a firm called Deloitte. They're gonna review the claim that you submitted and the evidence that you put in of your identification, and they're gonna check the box to say that you're entitled to compensation. Then the checks are gonna come out. We expect they're gonna be coming out mid to late this year. And again, there's a possibility it'll be a little bit later for minors, depending on the laws of the province. So I've been talking a lot about the compensation because that's what you all are for. But again, the really big win thing is what this claim does to help solve the problems that communities are still experiencing. Like the visa system. I can tell any of you that this is still a problem that needs to be fixed, even though we settled this last time. So a few of the things that this does to help achieve that. First thing I mentioned earlier, the action plan. Canada has that in place. Now they really have to take steps to fix the problems that they've already identified. They already know. They also have to maintain these standards. It's not good enough for them to just pay the money, get a system in place, and then leave it alone. It needs to be operated. It needs to be maintained. It needs to be handled with care, and that costs money. And Canada needs to pay all of it, the actual cost that it takes to do that work. 100% of the effort. They've got a minimum of $6 billion. Hello.
Maybe I'll just pull the meeting closer. Is that okay? Can you hear the back? Sorry, everyone. Okay. Do you want the mic? Maybe. Yeah. Do you want the movement? Let's move the movement. Okay. So, the money that they have to spend, they need to make sure that everything is operated and maintained. They've committed $6 billion between now and 2030. Again, that's a minimum. They have to spend $400 million a year. And if they're not spending it, we can take them back to court and say, why are you not spending? But taking Canada to court is not a good solution. I mean, part of the reason it's taken this long to get any compensation is because forcing Canada to do anything is like punchy. And the Canadian legal system is different. So we thought about that when we were negotiating the settlement, and we included a dispute resolution process that is different from what Canada would do. We don't want to use that. We're going to use the dispute resolution processes that the communities would follow, laws and First Nations. So first of all, if a First Nation thinks that Canada is not meeting their commitment, they notify Canada, and Canada immediately needs to come and consult with the community and talk to them about what it is that they need to be doing to live up to their commitment. If, for instance, the First Nation says the cisterns, like the Beacosis, are not good enough, they're not safe, and so we cannot tell our residents, our members, that they can drink that water. And Canada says, what do you mean? Well, okay, you go ahead and drink it. But Canada has to pay for it. Everything that they ask for, they need to pay for it. And then if they still say that's not good enough, it's not over. They have to come here to the community. They need to stand here where I'm standing right now and explain to you why they're not going to pay to upgrade the system. That process is going to be governed by the rules of the community. This is First Nation. The laws of this nation will govern that dispute process. Canada needs to follow them. Canada needs to pay half the amount of money that's going to cost to put that together. So half the cost of renting is food, half the cost of heating. We're hoping that Canada is going to do that. We're hoping that Canada is going to recognize that their legal obligations are binding, and that they're going to pay for the reasonable steps that they need to take to make sure you have safe drinking water. What that means depends on what standards we're talking about. What is safe drinking water? Well, there are existing standards, there are provincial standards, there are federal standards. The system needs to live up to the strictest of those standards. Also, I mentioned earlier, Canada is going to be upgrading their standards as part of this new legislation that they're putting together. And as I mentioned, the First Nations Advisory Committee is going to be at the table, talking to them about what they're putting in that legislation and making sure that it actually does what they say it's doing, which is improve the standard of drinking water on Missouri. And the last thing is I mentioned earlier, if the First Nation wants to create their own standards, they can do that. It costs money, it takes research, it has bylaws, there's money for that. The First Nation can apply for it and create their own standards, and govern their own water. You may wonder why I'm here and what I'm getting paid. It's a very fair question, and it's an important question whenever one of these things is settled. What are the lawyers doing? Why are they doing this? Well, the settlement that we reached, the agreement to compensate the communities, and the agreement that I just laid out, all of that was negotiated without talking about employers. And it was put in place, set aside. That agreement was going to go to the court to be approved, no matter what money got paid to the lawyers. Then we negotiated how much money would go to the lawyers. If it wasn't enough for us, and we were mad about it or whatever, that was never going to impact the settlement that we had already reached for the class members. Our own law firm is taking compensation from that to cover the cost that we pay to do the lawsuit. So to pay for us, everything in addition to that, we're donating back to the communities. So, because it doesn't make sense for us to make a profit out of this more than what it costs us to do the work. The point is to get drinking water to the communities. Two small points about the compensation that you're going to be receiving. It shouldn't impact any other money that you're getting from the government. That means two things. First of all, it shouldn't be taxed as income. This is in addition to your existing income. Also, if you're receiving social benefits, income support, sometimes there is an income test. You're entitled to some payments if your income is below a certain amount. This is not going to impact those at all. You're still entitled to every check that Canada would otherwise be paying to you. So that's it for the main presentation about the settlement. Now I'm going to go through the claim forms that you each have, just to make sure that each of the steps to fill it out are pretty obvious and clear. And I encourage anyone that has any questions while I'm going through this, please throw up your hand. Now's the time to ask, and we're also going to be paid at 6 o'clock. So if you don't want to ask in this forum, just flag it down, and I will come and help you. First of all, I see a question already, yes? Great, so the question is about the band registration number. What is the band registration number? So the band registration number is your treaty number, and it's the long number on your status card. There are two numbers on your status card. If you're running the older status cards, there's going to be a number on the top right corner. And on the newer ones, it's on the back side. That's the card number. So if you lose that card and you get a new card, your treaty number is going to be the same, but the card number is going to be different.
So it asks for both. It asks for the card number and it asks for the registration number. The registration number is the long number. But it's a very good question. It's a common question. And if you do have questions that come up after I left, there are people you can call. First of all, as the claim administrator, this hotline, they're there to answer any of the questions that you have about how to fill out the forms, whether you're eligible. If that's not working for you, if you can't get through to Lloyd, they're not answering your questions properly, you can call us. We're the class council team, and we can answer any of your questions. I mentioned earlier band council confirmation list. So before I go into the actual individual claim forms, I'm just going to speak to us in a second about the band council confirmation list. This will cover you all. So if you lived in the community during the drinking water advisory, your name should be on that list. And if your name is on that list, you're going to get compensation for the time that you spent in the community. Full stop. That's there. I see some questions. Yes. Great. So the question is, what if you lived on the reserve during the time you're eligible, but you're not from the Pegasus, you're not a member of the Pegasus? That's fine. You're still entitled to compensation because you live on the drinking water advisory. You do just need to be a member of the First Nation. So if you're moving us to the community, I'm not entitled to it. But if you are a member of the First Nation, you will be entitled to it. It's not a nation. You're a member of it. So the question is, it doesn't say in the claim form where you resided during that period. And that's true in the sense of like specifically where, but it does say the reserve and the community. So when you find in that long list of Pegasus, that's you saying that you lived on this reserve. The new claim forms specifically state the reserve. And if it doesn't matter what reserve, it'll just say NA, which we have for the Pegasus. So it doesn't really matter. I think a lot of the ones that you have, particularly the ones in color, they're the older ones, so they won't actually say that. But we do have some newer ones that will. That actually doesn't really matter all that much. As long as you fill out that line beside Pegasus, you're covered. Does that answer your question? I hope so. I see another question. Yes. Okay, but he has a tree number? She'll get 100% compensation for the amount of time he lives here. Oh, that's right. Sorry, 50%. So the question is, when I mentioned for every dollar that is paid to you, community gets another 50 cents. The question is, does that 50 cents go to the community you lived in or the community that you belong to? And the answer is the community you lived in. There's no guarantee that the community you belong to ever had a drink. The last point I just want to make about the bank council confirmation list is that if you fill out your own claim form and you put details in your claim form that are different from the details in the confirmation list, the details in your claim form are going to be different. So those are the ones that the administrator are going to rely on instead of what's in the confirmation list. I see the question.
I think there should be status card number. So Indian status card number, that's our 3-4-10-digit treaty number?
The status card number is not the long number. Is 384 the number? Thank you. Yes. The 384 number, that's going to be your band registration number.
The status number is that little thing in the back of the card.
Exactly. The new card is the numbers on the back. And the old card, they're up in the top right corner. Exactly. That's perfect. They're like darker, kind of folded numbers. Those are the card numbers. As long as you include your treaty number on there, you're good. Just make sure that that's on there. Yes. So I think the question is, once you've submitted the form that says I lived here for X number of time, where do they go to confirm that you actually lived here for X number of time? So there is no process for confirming that. We've tried to make this as straightforward as possible, and the more confirmation steps that we put in, the greater the barrier. So what we're doing is having you sign to confirm that you have put everything in there correctly and you're telling the truth. You're also going to get a witness by somebody. It can be any adult for the baby's name, and that witness is just saying, I know who you are, and I saw you sign this, and you are who you say you are. They're not saying that everything you put in here is true. I see you've got that question. Yeah. Okay. Yes. That's a great question, and I do get to the specified injuries, and we go through that in detail. But the question that we had was, for specified injuries, is it going to take longer for them to go through that process? What do you need to attach? What kind of proof do you need to attach? What are they asking for? What are you going to need to show in order to get compensation? You're putting it in that part. And the answer is that you don't need to attach anything. You don't need to attach a letter to the doctor. You don't need to write out a narrative about what happened to you. All of that we have found looking at past claims that have been done by other class actions. We found that was just a huge barrier, and it becomes re-traumatizing, and it becomes extremely onerous. The result is that people don't have the claim. They don't get the compensation they're entitled to. So the solution is you're checking the box, and you're writing down in that line beside it who it was that you spoke to about it, and who you tried to get help from. Now that's all you're going to need to do. You'll also identify what. Was that sorry? Yeah, that's right. So you'll indicate the doctor that you that treated you if you got treatment, or that you spoke to try to get treatment if you just tried to get treatment, which is all that's necessary. And there are 3 exceptions to that for the highest compensation amounts, and I'm going to talk about those specifically when we get to that stage. But for now, I think I'm just going to move on and see if I can go through and answer some of these questions in the presentation, and then we can maybe get to some more questions at the end. So there are essentially 3 main parts to the thing that you're filling out. There's the key details about yourself. That's probably the longest and most detailed part. You got to put in your first name, your last name, your date of birth, your then registration number, your treaty number is discussed, an issue to your province, and then your mailing information. Mailing information is important because that's where they're going to send a check if you want to get a check in the mail. Also include a phone number or an email, because if there are any issues with the claim form, if they have any questions, that's the way that they're going to want to deal with it. They're going to want to call you or email you. They don't want to send the form back to you and say that that's not what they're going to do. So make sure that you've got both of those things filled out accurately. If you think you might move in the next year or so, there's another option for getting the money. It's a direct deposit, and you can think about doing that instead of putting a check in the mail and getting it to the mail. That's the other question.
What if they only got registered to the band and half of the year or so, still
Yeah, so the question is if somebody who's been registered within the last year or so, they got a number within the last year or so, but have been in the community for much longer than that, drinking boil water advisory would otherwise be eligible, they're eligible. They'll hold that.
And then
we've discussed there's the specified injuries form, and then there is part 5, which is the declaration. I mentioned earlier that you just need to get somebody else to witness your form to say that you are who you say you are, and I saw you sign this form. For the specified injuries part, it's not just any other adult. It would have to be what we call a guarantor. So my son and my colleague Nancy can do that for you today while you're here for the form. All we need to do is see your ID to confirm that you are who you say you are. But when we leave, there are others that can do it. B&E, member of council that can do it. She can do it. You can also go to a police officer, a commissioner, notary public, teacher. There's a list just before the signature page that has other people that can sign it. And there's an even longer list on the website if none of those work for you. If you're filling out representative claim form, there are other sections at the end that you need to be aware of. Part 6 is if you're filling out for somebody that's under a disability. Part 7 for a minor child, person that passed away with an estate, which means with a will or some legal order for somebody to be responsible for the estate. There's also part 9 if someone passed away without a will and doesn't have a legal order for who is going to be responsible for the estate. So there are 2 different ones for somebody who's passed away. I touched on this a bit earlier, and I'm just going to re-emphasize it. The whole idea of the specified interest claims pages is not to be trumped. We want to make sure that it's as easy as possible for you to claim the damages that you experienced without making you relive those by writing out a whole narrative about what happened to you. So you're just going to check your boxes. You can attach, if you wanted to attach a letter from a doctor or something like that, you can. More than happy to accept it if you'd like to put it in. You don't have to. As I mentioned, there are 3 exceptions. If you are claiming for the highest amount of compensation for liver damage, or bloodstream infections, and for cancer, they will likely follow up with you and ask for a letter from a doctor or something to show that you did have the thing that you're asking for. And that's because for those 3, the compensation to the highest amount is significant. It's a lot of money. If it's cancer, for instance, it's over $100,000. So it is one additional step, but I really highly recommend that you take the time to do it because it will be worth it to include that letter. If you don't have time to do that between now and March 7th, it's also fine. It's not a requirement for submitting a claim. You will likely just get a phone call later from the administrator that will ask you for it. They will tell you how to send it, and then you can do it later. That might impact when you receive your check if you do it later, but you will receive that compensation as long as you're eligible. And as I mentioned, it requires a guarantor, so that's not just anyone. There are a list of people that I just mentioned who need to sign for that proposed payment. Oh, and if you don't have ID, so if you don't have ID for your main claim, you're not even making a medical claim, you're just making your main claim, but you don't have ID, just get the guarantor to fill out the guarantor picture. If that person knows who you are and can say, I know who they are who they say they are, then that's fine, and you don't need to get a scan of your ID. Otherwise, you need a scan of your ID to show that you are the person. Okay, there's 2 levels of form. Okay, this is a bit confusing. This part I find a bit difficult. For each of the harms that are listed, you'll have to choose level 1 and level 2. The basic requirements for each of them are the same. So you need to have suffered a significant prolonged health problem. Those are the ones that are listed, if any of those apply to you. It needs to have been caused by the drinking water event. Again, I mentioned this earlier, that's a difficult thing to prove. So no one needs to prove it. But you do need to believe it. You need to believe that was caused by the drinking water advisory. you know for a fact that you have had respiratory problems your whole life, long before this drinking water advisory was ever in place, don't put it down. That's not what the compensation is meant to be for. It's meant to be for people that actually suffer this harm because of drinking water. Those health symptoms for level 1 need to have lasted for at least a month, a minimum of a month, and you need to have tried to get treatment for it. You need to have tried to get that. It needs to have been that bad enough to get to talk to somebody. But that doesn't need to be a doctor, it doesn't need to be a nurse, it can be a traditional healer, it can be an elder, it can be anyone that you could have gone to get that help. That's going to qualify you for level 1 for that. If you're going to claim for the level 2 amount, this is the main difference between the two. The level 2 amount is you got treatment. And so the treatment needs to have come from a medical professional. It also come from a traditional healer, but it needs to have come from somebody who offers treatment to help with those kinds of problems. And it needs to have lasted for more than a year. Not just a month, more than a year. If both of those things are true, you can check the second amount and you're eligible for harm level 2. All of the same original requirements apply to harm level 2. This is the list of specified injuries that apply. I'm not going to go through it in detail because they're all on your claim forms. And there's even more detail on claim forms than I can probably tell you right now, so I'm not going to go into it. But these are all injuries that we were told by experts can be caused by tainted water. I see a question in the back, yes?
You're talking about these types of things like they have the name of a healthcare practitioner. They have to put a name in there, or?
That's an excellent question. So the question is, beside each of these, when you check the box, there's a line that says healthcare practitioner. Do you have to put a name in there if you leave it blank? You have to put a name in there. But it does say healthcare practitioner. That's a bit misleading, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a nurse or a doctor. If you spoke to an elder to try to get help, just put the name of the elder and then write elder underneath instead of doctor or nurse. And that's fine. An elder, because an elder isn't somebody you go to get treatment necessarily. If they're a traditional healer, then that's the person you go to. But if they're just an elder, that's not going to qualify you for the level 2. If you spoke to a traditional healer, then that will qualify you for level 2, and you can just write traditional healer. If you got Bush medicine, that's fine. Yeah. Exactly. If you received, if you got Bush medicine, you got some medicine for it to help you, just put in traditional healers.
In the area where you talk about alcohol, cigarettes, what do you there? Because I mean, you can go through the ceremony and get out of that addiction that you have. There's no, what is the document for it? I mean, smoking or whatever.
So I think the question is, if you suffer from an addiction, there are ways for you to help get over an addiction that can involve ceremony and things like that. And it's not necessarily coming from a doctor or something like that. It's a good question. Counseling, therapy, all of those things are captured in terms of things that can be like a therapist or a counselor would be the kind of person you would put down as eligible for having provided your treatment. And the same goes for, I would just put down the name traditional healing. And the reason I say that is because, pardon me. So, yeah, you can put traditional healer, put the name if you know the name. There's not going to be any follow-up. No one's going to be making phone calls. There's no level of confirmation. But if you don't remember the name, if you remember the organization they were tied to, you can put that down. If they were part of an agency or something like that, you can put that down instead. If you have no knowledge whatsoever of who the traditional healer was,
You could put down maybe where you received it. I would put down something to indicate what it was, the service was, and then indicate traditional ruler underneath. And the reason I say that is basically just this. We are not the ones that are going to determine eligibility. It's going to be a firm called Deloitte. Deloitte is going to look at this claim form, and they're going to say, did they fill this thing out wrong? And if you have nothing in that line, I don't know. Somebody could just say that's not done properly and then not award it, and I go on that path. But the requirement is not that you have to have the specific name of the person. It just needs to be something to indicate where it was. Okay. So I'm going to go through a bit of an example, and I'll see if I can do this kind of quickly, because I know this is dragging on a bit, and I apologize. So I'm going to use the example of a colleague of mine, Darian. And let's assume that Darian lived in his sister's station for his entire life. And because of water, he suffers from eczema. He started smoking, and he gets anxiety from using the water that comes from the water system. Anyway, say you go into Regina and you have anxiety about using the water there. That's what they're doing. So this is the first step. You're going to fill this one. So your first name, middle name, last name, date of birth. This isn't actually Darian's information, so don't sign up for a record. But you put the van registration number there. That's the treaty number that we talked about. He's from White Sand, which is a First Nation in Ontario. So we put down the First Nation that he belongs to. Notice that's not Peepeesis. But he lived in Peepeesis. So here, this is where he lives. This is where he's going to put his current mailing address. Should have filled out Saskatchewan here. So make sure you put in the province as well. And contact information, the phone number, the email, and that's how they're going to follow up. Then you find in the claim form, Peepeesis First Nation. So as we were talking earlier about where it says specifically where you live, I pulled this out of the current claim form, and so you'll see it says eligible reserves, and here it says NA, and that's because if you remember, Peepeesis are going to be eligible, it doesn't matter where. There are some First Nations where only certain reserves had drinking water advisories, and so those are listed there. And that wasn't the only ones. But you're going to find this, and here, this part here is to indicate when you lived in the community. So this first date is just when you got here, and if you were born here, you arrived when you arrived. So you put your date of birth, month, and year. This is when you left. If you never left, you never left. So put 123 because he still lives here. He's lived here his whole life. That captures the whole period of time. Any drinking water advisory that was experienced within that amount of time is eligible for. They're going to tally it up and they're going to pay. You don't need to do the math. They'll do the math. And then you sign. So here, you sign, you put your name so you can read it, you put today's date, the 18th, and down here, any and all to witness it. Again, that's just to say I know who you are, and you are who you say you are. It doesn't need to be myself, and it doesn't need to be my colleague. So that's it. That's the main claim. That gets you the basic amount of compensation. The next part is the specified injuries part. So again, he's lived here his entire life. Because of the water, he has eczema, he started smoking, he's got this anxiety about drinking water from the taps. Because of this problem, he went and saw Dr. Veda at the health center for his skin and his smoking problem. So he saw a doctor. For his anxiety, he's spoken to an elder. So on this first page, this is for his skin, dermatological. If you've got eczema, it's like a dermal lesion. Sometimes it's not clear which one to put in here. If you're not sure, it's not going to make a big difference. But if you've got actual skin lesions, I would put dermal lesions. If it's something else that you're not really sure, it might be skin infection, it might be chlorine toxicity. Do the best that you can to pick the one that you think is responsible. But don't worry too much about that. What matters is if you have this condition. And then he's put down the name of the doctor, Dr. Veda. Again, if you don't remember doctor's name, that's fine. You can say which health center you went to. You went to a hospital, you put the hospital name. That's fine.
Doesn't matter who it is, because they're not gonna follow up, there's no phone calls, it doesn't matter. But you wanna put the type of practitioner, you wanna put doctor down here, because if you receive treatment for it, so we got cream, and it lasted for longer than a year, you can select number 2. As long as it's a doctor and you got treatment for it. Doesn't need to be a doctor, though. It could be a traditional healer. Substance addiction on the mental health page, on the next page. Notice he has not checked off anything here. He's not circling tobacco use, he's not circling anything. He's just indicating that he had a substance addiction. That's all you need to put on here. Doesn't matter what it was. Again, his postdoc data lasted longer than a year, so he's claiming for the second level 2. Generalized anxiety disorder. He's put down the name of the elder and the type of practitioner. I've got the check mark in number 2 here. That's a mistake because we've got elder here. And that an elder is not on the list of individuals that can provide treatment at level 2. So I put traditional healer. If it was a traditional healer. Otherwise, level 1. And then the signature. Oh, I see a question in the back. Yeah.
Yeah, that one up. Number 9. You only check one slot.
So I hear the question is for number 9, you can only check one of the boxes. Are you referring to the boxes that like in which column? The last column?
No, first one.
Oh, the first column.
You can only addiction or anxiety.
Oh, good, very good question. So yeah, if you've got, say you've got generalized anxiety, you've got addiction, and you've also suffered from depression, other things on that list. Check off everything that applies. Everything that applies to you, that you're comfortable putting down. And then you sign it. So you'll sign at the top, do the same thing we did before, put in the signature, the name, and the date. And then the guarantor fills out the bottom parts. That could be a counselor, it could be myself. Again, it's just to say that you are who you say you are. And that's it. You're all set. So, the last step is just to send it to the claim administrator. As I mentioned earlier, the address for this is in the claim form. It's on the page that's immediately after your first signature page. So the first page that you signed, flip it over, there's a mailing address, there's a fax number, and there's an email address. You can send it there. Make sure you attach a scan of your ID. If you want a direct deposit, include a direct deposit slip. If you're making a claim for minors, there are additional things that you need to attach, so you make sure that they are attached. You need ID for the minor, ID for yourself, and if you're the parent, make sure that you've got a scan of the birth certificate. That's what they would like to see, just to make sure that you are indeed the parent. That's just to make sure that the payment's going to the right person. You don't want to pay money to somebody who's not entitled to it. Very good question. So what if you're the grandparent? This covers custody. This covers legal custody. If you're the grandparent and you have custody, you're the one that should be paying for it. Now, if you've got like a legal documentation for that, that's great. Include that. If you don't, that's also fine. Because that's the Canada's legal documents don't necessarily require permissions. Doesn't mean it's not legal custody. It doesn't mean that's not the way community goes about caring for the younger. You're looking at the birth time for a minor. I would include a letter from the chief of council, the school would be good, for anyone that they would know that knows the relationship, that knows the situation. If you've got a letter like that, just confirm that you are, then we're happy to bring the right person to complain. The last thing I would do is just make sure that you're not sending. Yes, you can get a letter from the father, I think it's a good idea. To say that I'm father and mother. But I would include maybe a scan of his ID, so that they know that he's the father, or a birth certificate. I mean, send you got the birth certificate? That's good. Yes. Yeah, that's right. And you should certainly be able to get it.
Good.
copies it off. So thank you very much again for having me here, and I'm not going anywhere. So as you go about filling out your forms, if you have other questions or if anything comes up, please just flag us, myself and my colleague, and we'll come around and talk to you all. So I'm just going to sign off at the moment. I can come by. I see people that already have questions. But I think I'm going to wrap up this session and just come and help you each. So again, thank you very much. Yes, I will.
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. I will sign. Why don't I just quickly ask the question, answer the question, and then I'll come back and sign.
Okay. And do you have a piece of ID? Perfect.
No, just the map. I think that's very representative.
But I'm also sign with that. Okay, great. Sorry.
All right. Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm just going to sign off on this. Yeah. Don't waste your time. And did you want to get a check in the mail or did you want to direct if you're mailing it, I would put it together. So that there's no, so if you have yeah. That's okay. I can help you out with that. Do you know what things you're looking for? Garlic cream, the last, is that last longer? The more than a month. Bar. Yeah.